Look, I'm about to say something you're not supposed to say. If priests are supposed to be the closest people to God, why is it that some of them commit the darkest crimes imaginable? And I'm not talking about one bad apple here. I'm talking about patterns across countries, across religions, across centuries. Things so ugly that the people who believe in them can't even bear to hear them. You've probably never asked this out loud. Maybe because you don't want to offend anyone. Maybe because part of you is afraid the answer might change the way you see everything. But here's the truth. If you want to understand how good people get away with terrible things, you have to look in the one place nobody wants to look. The real devil always hides where you least dare to look. And that's what we're doing today. We're going under the robes, behind the altars, and into the walls you've always been told are holy. What you hear next, you can't unhear. And by the end of this, you might never see holiness the same way again. Let's be real for a second. People commit crimes everywhere. But in religion, it's different. Because the system is built to make certain crimes almost untouchable. First, absolute authority. In most religions, the priest, the monk, the imam, the guru, they speak for God. And when someone claims to speak for God, who's going to challenge them? Who's going to call them a liar? Even victims hesitate, because doubting them feels like doubting God. Second, sexual repression. Many faiths demand celibacy or strict control over desire. And sure, that can sound noble. But here's the psychological truth. Repressing desire doesn't erase it. It mutates. It finds shadows to hide in. And in those shadows, it can twist into something far darker. Third, collective silence and taboo. In tight-knit religious communities, calling out abuse is not just risky, it can exile you. Families are pressured to forgive and forget. Victims are told to pray it away. Leaders handle it internally, which often means it gets buried. And when all three factors collide, unquestioned authority, warped desire, and forced silence, you get the perfect storm. Not for holiness, for harm. Across faiths, the pattern repeats. A Catholic priest in Boston shuffles from parish to parish, his crimes hidden. A Buddhist monk in Thailand uses his spiritual status to exploit young followers. An imam in a small community quietly abuses women who come to him for counsel. Different robes, same pattern. Faith should be light, but too often, it's the best hiding place for the shadow. And here's the part most people don't want to face. The problem isn't just bad apples. It's the orchard, the way it's built, the way it protects its own. Which means, if we want to talk about change, we have to be willing to question the very structure that claims to be sacred. Let's start with one of the most infamous stories in modern religion, the Boston Archdiocese abuse scandal. For decades, priests in Boston preyed on children, not one or two, hundreds. And here's the part that still makes people sick. Inside the church, they knew when a priest was caught, they didn't call the police. They quietly reassigned him to another parish. New church, new congregation, new kids. It was like hitting reset on a predator's career. And this wasn't an accident. It was policy. Internal memos show the priority wasn't protecting children, it was protecting the institution. They feared scandal more than they feared sin. And Boston wasn't unique. The same thing happened in Ireland, Australia, France, Canada, different continents, same cover-up playbook. Even the Vatican itself wasn't untouched. High-ranking clergy have been accused, and in some cases, convicted of abuse or shielding abusers. When the people in charge are the ones committing the crimes, the system bends itself into knots to protect them. So, why does this happen so often in the Catholic Church? Part of the answer lies in celibacy. Priests are required to take a vow of chastity, no sex, no marriage. On paper, it's meant to elevate them above worldly desires. In reality, psychology tells a different story. Suppressing a basic human drive doesn't erase it. It mutates. It hides in the dark corners of the mind until it spills out in twisted, harmful ways. And the secrecy? That's gasoline on the fire. In therapy, you see it all the time. The more shame someone attaches to sex, the more likely it is to leak out sideways, often in destructive ways. That's not an excuse. It's an explanation, and it's one the church still refuses to truly face. If you've seen the movie Spotlight, you know the power of this story. The Boston Globe reporters didn't just expose abuse, they exposed the machinery that made abuse possible. They found patterns, documents, survivor testimony that all pointed to the same truth. This wasn't a few bad priests. This was a culture of silence, written into the system itself. And here's the part that's hard to forget. The church still asks victims and the public to forgive. But forgiveness without truth isn't forgiveness. It's just another way to keep people quiet. You can buy your way into heaven. Sure, but you'll never buy back a stolen childhood. And if a religious institution this powerful could hide something this monstrous for this long, you have to wonder what else is still hidden behind the walls we call holy. When you talk about sexual abuse in the Islamic world, you have to start with one uncomfortable fact. Religion and law are often the same thing. And when religion writes the law, it writes it in a way that puts one gender firmly above the other. In many Muslim-majority societies, men can legally marry up to 4 wives. Girls can be married off before they're even old enough to understand what marriage means. Strict gender segregation controls who can see, speak to, or even be alone with whom. On paper, it's all framed as protecting women's honor. In practice, it gives men almost total control over women's bodies and choices. And when you give that much control to one side of the table, abuse isn't a question of if. It's a question of how often. And it doesn't stop in peacetime. In war zones, the rules bend even further. Groups like ISIS turned sexual slavery into an actual institution. Women, mostly Yazidis, Christians, and other minorities, were captured, sold in markets, and passed around as rewards for fighters. They called it a religious prize, a blessing from God. In Boko Haram's Nigeria, entire schoolgirls' dormitories were raided in the middle of the night. Hundreds of girls were kidnapped, forced into marriages with their captors, or sold into sexual slavery. Some were as young as 12. The propaganda framed it as holy duty. Fighters were told they were cleansing the land, purifying the bloodline. In reality, it was just weaponized rape. And the most chilling part? They didn't hide it. ISIS literally published slave price lists. They treated women like cattle. But even outside the chaos of war, sexual violence lives quietly in daily life. In conservative communities, if a woman is raped, her biggest fear isn't always the attacker. It's her own family, because speaking out can ruin her reputation, bring shame on her household, or even get her punished for immorality. Families pressure victims to stay silent. Religious leaders tell them to forgive. Police often won't investigate unless a male witness comes forward, which, in crimes like rape, almost never happens. And this silence? It's the abuser's best friend. It lets him keep doing what he's doing, while the community pretends nothing happened. I remember one survivor from Mosul describing how she was taken from her home by ISIS fighters. She was raped repeatedly for months. When she finally escaped, she begged her family for help, and they told her not to talk about it. Not because they didn't believe her, but because they were more afraid of the gossip than the crime. That's the kind of environment where predators thrive. It's not just about the man committing the act. It's about the system that guarantees no one will stop him. And when that system is draped in the language of faith, it becomes bulletproof. You can't question it without being accused of insulting God himself. You can call it protection. You can call it honor. But let's be honest, it's control. And control that deep, that sacred, is a perfect cover for abuse. Some people still think sexual repression is about morality. But morality without consent isn't morality, it's domination. And when desire is buried under layers of guilt and silence, it doesn't disappear. It rots. It turns into something cruel. You can wrap it in scripture. You can call it divine. But abuse is abuse. And if a society refuses to see it, it will keep happening in the shadows, in the open, everywhere in between. The truth is, the danger isn't just the extremists with guns and slave markets. It's also the quiet, everyday acceptance of a system that tells victims to shut up and endure. And if that sounds harsh, remember this: it's a lot less harsh than what the victims live through. When people think of Buddhism, they picture peace, chanting monks, silent temples, a way of life built on compassion and self-control. But behind the calm smile of the Buddha, there's a side of the story few want to talk about. Take Tibetan Buddhism. For years, allegations have surfaced against high-ranking lamas, spiritual leaders revered almost like living gods. These are men followers believe can bless your soul, guide your next life, even shape your karma. And yet, behind closed doors, some have used that reverence to take what they wanted. One of the most disturbing cases involved a well-known lama in the Nyingma tradition. Multiple women accused him of sexual assault, saying they were told their spiritual development depended on offering themselves to him. When a man sits on a throne of both faith and destiny, no stops feeling like an option. Move south to Thailand, and the picture doesn't get better. There, temple prostitution isn't an urban legend. It's an open secret. Investigations have found monks running brothel-like operations inside temple grounds, exchanging blessings for cash or sex. Some use temple donations to fund lavish lifestyles. Sports cars, gold watches, and a steady rotation of companions. And then there's Japan. In 2018, a scandal hit the Soto Zen sect when a so-called sex monk was exposed for fathering children with multiple women while still presenting himself as a celibate spiritual guide. He wasn't a rogue outlier. His case pulled back the curtain on a quiet culture of sexual relationships between clergy and lay followers, often hidden in plain sight. So, how does a tradition that preaches detachment from desire end up tangled in so much of it? It comes down to two things: celibacy and power. Celibacy sounds pure, noble even. But from a psychological point of view, suppressing sexual desire doesn't make it disappear. It pushes it underground, into secrecy, where it can morph into something darker. And when you add spiritual power to the mix, the kind of authority that convinces people you hold the keys to their next life. You don't just have temptation, you have a marketplace. In that marketplace, the currency isn't always money. Sometimes it's devotion. Sometimes it's access. Sometimes it's the unspoken belief that pleasing a spiritual leader earns you blessings you can't get any other way. And here's the thing: in communities where monks are seen as above reproach, victims often blame themselves. They think they misunderstood. They think they're the ones who sinned. That's not enlightenment. That's grooming, dressed in robes. You can drape a man in saffron cloth. You can give him a string of prayer beads. But if you hand him unchecked power, the robe won't change his nature. The robe can't hide desire, and the rules can't cage the heart. And if that sounds harsh, remember, it's a lot less harsh than what happens to those who trust the wrong monk. Here's the part that's hardest to admit. Faith doesn't just fail to stop abuse sometimes. It can actually make it easier. For a victim, speaking out against a religious leader isn't just about accusing a person. It feels like accusing God. In many traditions, to question the priest, the monk, the imam, is to question the faith itself. And that's not just socially dangerous in some places, it's literally a crime. So, victims stay quiet. They tell themselves it's better to suffer in silence than to be seen as betraying their religion. They're afraid they'll lose their community, their family, even their own sense of belonging. And when abuse is reported, guess who investigates? The same institution that stands to lose the most if it's true. Church committees, temple councils, religious boards. It's like letting the fox run the investigation into the missing chickens. They call it internal review. What it really means is damage control. Then there's the group psychology. Believers don't want to believe their spiritual hero is capable of evil. Because if he is, then maybe the whole thing they've built their lives around isn't what they thought it was. So instead of facing that pain, they defend him. They blame the victim. They tell themselves it's all lies, all exaggeration, all a test of faith. And just like that, the abuser isn't hiding in the shadows anymore. He's hiding in the light, shielded by the very people he's hurting. Faith is supposed to shine a light on human nature, but too often, it's the best shade darkness could ask for. Carl Jung had a concept he called the collective shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to see, not just as individuals, but as whole communities. The darker the shadow, the more fiercely we deny it. And here's the twist. The more holy a place claims to be, the easier it is for that shadow to hide there. Think about it. When we believe something is sacred, we stop questioning it. We assume it's pure by default. And that blind trust makes it the safest hiding place for the very things we think could never be there. That's why sacred spaces, churches, mosques, temples, can be both the most inspiring places in the world and the most dangerous. They're built to protect the spirit, but in doing so, they can also protect the predator. The psychology behind it is simple. Sexual repression doesn't erase desire. It twists it. It forces it underground, into secrecy, where it mutates into something distorted. And when you combine that with moral hypocrisy, preaching purity while practicing something else, you get a perfect breeding ground for abuse. So here's the question. Is it religion that corrupts people? Or is it people who use religion to hide their corruption? And maybe the deeper question is this. What does true faith even mean? Is it the refusal to see the darkness because it's uncomfortable? Or the courage to look it straight in the eye Because faith that can't face its own flaws isn't faith. It's denial, dressed up in holy robes. You can call something sacred all day long. You can build rituals around it, write scriptures about it, defend it with your life. But until you admit that the shadow is part of the picture, you'll never really see the whole thing. Holiness isn't about never making mistakes. It's about owning them. It's about refusing to hide your darkness in the name of light. And until faith learns to do that, it will keep offering the perfect shelter for the very evil it claims to fight. We've covered a lot. Stories that most people would rather keep buried. But these aren't just their stories, they belong to all of us, because they shape the way faith is seen and the way power is used. So I want to hear from you. What scandals have you seen swept under the rug in the name of religion? And do you think faith, real faith, can look its own shadow in the eye? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. Your perspective matters, because silence is how these stories stay hidden. And if this made you think or made you see something in a new light, share it. Send it to someone who still believes it could never happen here. Because the truth doesn't fear the light, only lies do.